high sensitivity troponins are probably, those assays are probably coming fairly soon. It's inevitable here in the United States, probably sooner than later. Now, the issue is the upper reference limit for such assays. Okay, that's defined as the 99th percentile value from a normal reference population. One of the challenges is there is no clear consensus regarding the composition of a normal population in this context. So, a paper and an accompanying commentary and Jack look at this issue. The paper is Age and Sex-Dependent Upper Reference Limits for the High Sensitivity Cardiac Troponin T Assay. And I am with Dr. James A. DeLemos, MD, Distinguished Chair in Cardiology at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center and Cardiology Service Chief at Parkland Memorial Hospital. A lot of cardiologists feel a little dread as we look at these high sensitivity assays. What's the problem, first off, and then we'll get into some of the specifics?
Well, I think the one problem is that clinicians are not clamoring for more sensitivity for MI diagnosis. I think that most of us who spend time on consultative services and in the hospital think the existing assays might be too sensitive. So in our view, a lot of the advantages of these sensitive assays are going to be not in MI diagnostics, but perhaps in new indications where detecting really small amounts of cardiac injury is useful.
So in terms of what you're writing about in this particular paper, can you talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, so what we did is we recognized we'd done a lot of work in our population study, the Dallas Heart Study, looking at determinants of troponin in the population. And in collaboration with colleagues from the ERIC study and the Cardiovascular Health Study, we all recognized that what people were talking about as the 99th percentile didn't mesh with what we thought we saw in our preliminary data. So we put 3 large population-based studies together, and these have major advantages over the initial reference range studies because they're representative of the population across the age range, and they have what we call deep phenotyping, so we can really characterize what is and what isn't normal. So we did that. We put 3 separate studies together, and we pulled out people who had abnormal cardiac status, abnormal renal status, and we're left with a very clean normal range study of over 12,500 people, which is more than 10 times the size of anything that's been published before.
So what's the take-home message in terms of it's coming, what do we do about it? What still needs to be done?
Well, a lot, first of all, but with regard to the reference range, the reference range that's recommended for use is far too low. And what we show is that there's such strong age and sex dependence on this that 14 nanogram per liter reference range that's recommended for use is really only useful for very young men and young and middle-aged women. The people who come in with heart attacks, older men, older women, need a much higher reference range, or else you're going to have a marked overdiagnosis of MI. For example, 10% of men 65 or older live within troponin T value above the recommended reference range. So you can imagine the issues with false positive myocardial infarction diagnoses with this low threshold that's being recommended. So in our paper, we use the detailed data to propose higher thresholds for MI diagnosis, particularly for older men and older women.
Do you think it's going to be accepted as, yeah, this makes sense, or are there going to be people fighting you over this?
Oh, there'll always be people fighting. I think it's going to resonate with people who've done any work with this assay. I think, it's very likely that this is a correct observation. What's not clear is these haven't been clinically validated. So showing a 99th percentile value is one thing, but now these thresholds, these age and sex thresholds, need to be evaluated clinically. And what we'd like to see is that the investigators from the original studies that compared the 99th percentile of 14 nanogram per liter with the standard assays go back and test these, because they can do that in their data sets and see whether some of the false positive problem can be mitigated with use of these age and sex dependent cut points.
Are we going to get this ironed out before they're approved?
I hope so. I think, this is assay specific, so I don't believe this is an issue to the same extent with the high sensitivity troponin I assays. But I don't think we'll have everything ironed out before these come in the market. And I think there's going to be a lot of education. In my view, complex algorithms are going to be needed to take advantage of these assays, because there are advantages, really. They can shorten the MI rule-out time, and we can resolve small changes over serial measurement because they are better assays and more precise. So
false positives should definitely go down, wouldn't you say?
If we change the threshold,
yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely they should. Yeah.
Anything else in terms of when these might see clearance? Next year, 2 years?
I don't have any knowledge of that. I don't work at that
They've
level.
been talking
Yeah.
about them for some time
They
now.
have, and I think there's, one of the issues is likely how to handle values below the 99th percentile, because there's a lot of information there, and that can create a great deal of confusion for clinicians if they're faced with. We're used to positive and negative troponins. With these assays, we will get a number for most everybody that comes into the emergency room, and trying to figure out what those numbers mean that are below the MI threshold is part of the challenge in interpreting them that we have to work out.
Well, this is a really interesting paper, and I don't think I mentioned the fact this is in the April 15th issue of JACC. Dr. Fuster probably won't forgive me if I don't mention that specifically. For CardioSource World News, I'm Executive Editor Rick McGuire.